Helldivers2 Makes Me Sad. Arrowhead made a fantastic game. It's a 4-player co-op horde shooter that is a live service game, but it's a live service game that doesn't nickel and dime the players. It respects the players' time, it respects the players' money, and it's just fun. It's just plain fun to play. There's so many live service games they put the game company that made them put the cart before the horse, and were so focused on the monetization method that they forgot to actually make a game that's fun to play. But Helldivers 2 isn't that. It's a incredible fun game that was a model that so recently has just been filled with filth that nickel and dimes the players and expects it to be the only thing the players focus on. But it's not that. It's a fun game first, and then like a live service model second with the war bonds. But then even then, the war bonds can be totally free if you just play the game enough and earn the premium currency, the currency that buys the war bonds. And what makes me sad is that it's getting worse. And there's, I believe, 3 main points as to why the game's getting worse. Point the first. I do not work at Arrowhead. I do not know anybody that has that does or has worked at Arrowhead Game Studios. I have not spoken to anybody that does or has worked at Arrowhead Game Studios. So everything I'm saying here comes from someone who has just played the game, their experience with the game, and has a passing knowledge of game structure and how games are made. But Helldivers 2 feels like a game that is made of spaghetti code, and if you don't know what that is, it's a code that's such a jumbled mess. It's like cooked spaghetti. It's just a jumbled mess of stuff that intertwines with each other, and nobody really can parse the entirety of the code. But it feels like outdated. It feels like spaghetti code on and I can say this for a 100% fact, on an outdated engine that has been abandoned by its developer, because Helldivers 2 uses the Stingray engine, which support was dropped by Autodesk on November 7th, 2018. So it is likely spaghetti code on definitely an outdated, barely supported engine, because I do believe Autodesk does provide some support for people that still use the engine at the point that they abandoned it, but it's likely very minimal support. And I feel this way because each patch since the game launched has just introduced new performance issues and game crashes. When the game launched on my computer, which I know isn't a fucking thing, it runs on my system, is not a good argument, but when the game launched on my computer at least, it was buttery smooth and never crashed. But since all of the series of patches that have come out to like try and fix things, add new things, it's just introduced spikes in game lag and just new and interesting crashes to the game. It's just the game performs worse and worse with each patch. And additionally, even when the game launched, while the performance was great, there was no crashes, no frame drops, there was a bunch of bugs in the code. For example, damage over time just flat out not working. The support weapon Spear not locking on properly. Yeah, damage over time. So when the game first launched, damage over time was bugged. It only really worked for the server host. So damage over time is stuff like fire and poison, where after the initial instance of damage, there will be a counter that ticks, and for every tick, the creature that is affected by it takes damage. This was bugged so that damage over time had no overtime effect. fire and poison did its initial damage, but no damage over time afterwards unless the player who initiated it was the server host. And the server host wasn't always the game host. It could vary. And that, of course, since damage over time was broken, players didn't use damage over time stuff. The spear was bugged, wherein the spear is a rocket launcher support weapon that has a targeting system, and once the target is locked, you press the button to fire it, and it fires the rocket up, and then it pivots and comes down and goes straight into the target you locked onto. And so the whole point of it was a big enemy, big target, I see that and I don't want to see it anymore kind of thing. But it didn't work because there was something wrong with the targeting system, and it just very often would not lock on to anything. Even if it was the only thing in front of you and there was nothing between you and it just would not lock on. It just did not work. And these bugs that launched with the game took multiple months to fix. I believe damage over time didn't even get fixed until 2 months after the game launched, and the spear took even longer. And then sometimes the fix to an existing problem introduces a new problems. Like when they eventually got around to actually managing to fix the spear, they fixed it, but the fix created a new problem where, since the targeting now worked, but it wouldn't lock on to bot fabricators. And then when they eventually fixed it to get it to be able to lock on to bot fabricators without breaking the targeting system again, now trying to fire the spear would crash the player's game. And then it took them even longer to fix that, which I believe is actually fixed now. It's been a while since I played the game. In all transparency, I took a long-ass break from the game when the Shadow of the Erdtree DLC for Elden Ring came out. So I've only recently started playing the game again, but it's just a very recent patch happened, and it's just kind of killed my enjoyment of the game, and I just don't look forward to it again anymore and don't trust Arrowhead, but that's besides the point. Sometimes new content will launch in a already broken state. For example, the Airburst rocket launcher, when that first was made available to the players, it was terrible. The thing was designed to be a rocket that, when detects a target, will burst into a bunch of smaller explosives, and then those will carpet an area in explosions, kind of like a big chaff patrol clearing weapon, single shot, clear out an entire base kind of thing. But the bloody thing didn't work because its sphere of there is a target, its sphere of detection for detecting a target was too big, and then there was too many different things that it would consider a target. It would consider the ammo box next to your foot a target. It would consider the turret right in front of you a target. It would consider a Helldiver 5 feet to your left a target. It would consider the dead corpse 10 feet in front of you a target. So it led to a lot of instances where the Airburst rocket launcher would detonate right in the player's face after they shot it, and it took them a while to fix that. Now, I don't blame the devs for any of this stuff. Having spaghetti code sounds like a nightmare. From what I've heard, they kind of put themselves into this position, and it wasn't like something that they stumbled into or was forced upon them. The Stingray engine was abandoned fairly early in Helldivers development, and instead of switching over to a different engine, they just decided, fuck it, we'll modify it so that it's our own kind of engine, and it just led to this spaghetti mess of code. But again, I don't blame the devs themselves, the people who have to work with this stuff, because it must be a nightmare trying to decipher spaghetti code and then trying to use an outdated engine that isn't being supported anymore. It must be awful to deal with that kind of stuff, and my heart goes out to the devs who have to deal with that stuff. However, I do blame the devs for point the second, poor quality assurance. It feels like there is very little to no quality assurance testing being done on new content, or the quality assurance team is not being listened to by anybody at Arrowhead Studios. Again, I don't work there. I don't know anybody that works there. I haven't talked to anybody who works there. I don't know if there actually is a quality assurance team, whether or not there is, and if there is, if they're being listened to. Because it feels, as a player, it feels like there is no team, or the team is not being listened to. Because content is consistently being pushed out in a buggy, unfinished, or just plain unfun state. There was a damage over time buff, while damage over time weapons were broken. And that led to, that damage over time buff was mainly a buff to fire, but it's like, because damage over time was broken, the players couldn't take advantage of it, but the enemies sure did, because this wasn't a buff to just the players' flame-based weapons. This was a buff to fire across the board. So while damage over time was broken, they saw that fire-based stuff had a low pick rate, so they decided to buff damage over time. They decided to buff fire. Well, player stuff was still bad because it was broken and not working properly. But enemies, the Hulk Scorcher, now erases players because it does an obscene amount of fire damage, and it actually can take a use of the damage over time because it wasn't bugged for the enemies. They tried to fix patrol spawn rates. Apparently, when the game launched, patrol spawns were broken. So the games, you can have 1 to 4 players in a mission, and patrol spawns were supposed to match the player count. So if you have 4 players, full patrol spawns, 3 players, 3/4, 2 players, half, 1 player, 1/4 of full patrol spawns. But apparently it was broken so that everything other than a full lobby was lower than it's supposed to be. So like 3 players was lower than 3/4, 2 players was lower than a half, 1 player was lower than a quarter. They wanted to fix this to bring it up to the quarter, half, 3/4 full. But they fucked it up and made it so that every single mission, regardless of player count, had the full patrol spawn rate of a 4-player lobby. So it didn't matter if you dropped in with 1, 3, or 2 players, you had the full 4-player patrol spawn rate. I'd be remiss without mentioning the Airburst rocket launcher again, as to something that wasn't tested. There was a fix to ricochets. When the game launched, ricochets didn't work properly. How it's supposed to work is if there's a heavily armored enemy and you have a weapon that doesn't have enough armor piercing to go through its armor, if you don't hit it dead on 90 degrees, there's a chance it'll ricochet, a high chance it'll ricochet. And basically this ricochet was supposed to be able to do damage to other players. However, it wasn't working properly and players weren't taking damage from this ricochet effect. So they fixed it, and now the ricochets actually work. To their credit, this is one of the fixes that they didn't fuck something else up by fixing it, except for shrapnel. Because you see, there's a certain weapon called the Eruptor, and it's an explosive. It's a weapon that fires an explosive tipped bullet that creates a shrapnel explosion. This was a very good horde clearing primary, but also a way to deal with heavy enemies, where if you hit them in the sweet spot, you could shred them with the shrapnel generated by the explosion. However, when the ricochet fix happened, it turned out that if the player was standing just a little too close to where the bullet detonated, the player would get shredded by the shrapnel. I'm talking closer than if you stood to the fragmentation grenade, the shrapnel grenade. If you stood the same distance, the Eruptor would kill you from its shrapnel. Another one is anti-tank mines not being anti-tank. It's just, I haven't gotten a chance to test them out yet because I haven't been able to do much playing. Hey, Editing Chance here. I just wanted to say I actually have gotten a chance to test the AT mines. So here's the clip of me finding a tank and using the mines on that. Automaton outpost destroyed. So as you can see, the AT mines are actually capable of taking out the tank, but I did have to soften it up with the orbital gas strike and landing the mine dispenser on top of the tank before, and then kiting the tank through the minefield before they actually managed to do anything to it. So I think it's safe to say that these are not a good anti-tank weapon at all. However, I have seen footage of other players playing the game. Someone very clearly laid down an anti-tank mine field, and the tank, the automaton tank, rolled straight through the middle of the anti-tank minefield and was unaffected. You could see 6 visible explosions of anti-tank mines going off, and the tank just did not care. Anti-tank mines are not anti-tank, and that is a summary of Arrowhead's recent meddling with Helldivers, is they can't get anti-tank mines right. Because not only are they not deal enough damage, or either not have enough armor piercing to deal with actual tanks, but they get set off by light enemies. The whole idea of anti-tank mines is they do high damage and only get set off by heavy enemies, so they are specifically anti-tank. We already have anti-infantry mines, the regular mines and the napalm mines. Why would you make it so that light enemies can set off the anti-tank mines? That makes them even more useless than the pre-existing mines. Mines are already in a bad state for Helldivers just because of the way Helldivers works. There's a single mission that can take advantage of how mines work. Everything else, mines are trash. And you made even worse mines. And then the last thing I want to mention is the patrol spawn double fix. So Arrowhead, rightfully, Arrowhead looked at player feedback for the patrol spawn fix and saw that players were unhappy with it. They looked into it, figured out they borked it up, and that patrol spawns were not working, and that every single lobby had full patrol spawn rates. So they reverted it, but then in the same patch they added a change to how enemy spawns in general work that made it worse. They made it worse by trying to fix it. Their rationality was that they don't want big empty maps. But it's like, you need empty parts of the map because of how ammo economy works in this game. You need downtime between enemy engagements. And you only have 40 minutes for these missions. You need periods of downtime when there's no spawns, no patrols hounding your ass to resupply, refocus, recenter, and get going with the mission again. So their rationality for changing how enemy spawns in general work was bad, and it also borked up patrol spawns again. Because now it's even worse, and they spawn even more frequently, and missions feel like they're 2 difficulties harder than they used to be. Before the initial patrol spawn fix, I was able to solo diff 5 missions on automatons. Now I drop into a diff 3 mission solo, and it feels like I'm playing diff 5. They made the game artificially harder for some preconceived idea of filling up the map with enemies. And this is the thing, and this is to my point, is all of these things that I've mentioned so far for the QA stuff, they would have been caught if someone did QA testing. The AT mines would have been noticed within minutes of QA testing that these mines aren't AT. The airburst rocket launcher detonating in players' faces would have been noticed within minutes of QA testing. This stuff is getting pushed out without being properly tested. And that leads players to think that we are Arrowhead's QA team. The player should not be Arrowhead's QA team. That is... No! Just no! The player should not touch stuff that is not finished. And that's what this reeks of, is just content that is not finished. But that leads me into problem third. The balancing team is doing balancing wrong, and I am not one to say that somebody's doing their job wrong unless I am very intimately familiar with that type of job. However, I can say that as a player, the way the balancing team is going about things is wrong, because it makes the game less fun. It pulls back the curtain and makes players realize this is not it, Chief. This ain't it, Chief. Because Arrowhead are very clearly, maybe not even in full, if in part, balancing by spreadsheet. And I'll give you some examples of this, just like with the previous points. Some examples. When the game first launched, the railgun was the top pick for support weapons stratagems. It was far beyond any other support weapon in pick rate. So Arrowhead saw that the railgun had an extremely high pick rate and chose to nerf the railgun because it had an extremely high pick rate on high difficulties. The flamethrower, around the same time, had an abysmal pick rate of all the support weapons. And so Arrowhead saw this bottom of the barrel pick rate for the flamethrower and decided to buff fire. The slugger had its damage and stagger reduced. And the reasoning behind it, a dev came out with the reasoning behind it, was because the slugger, a pump action shotgun that fires slugs, was the best marksman rifle in the game. It was stated recently in a recent patch before the fire themed Warbond came out. There was a patch, and in this patch, the Breaker Incendiary had its ammo capacity, its max ammunition nerfed, and the flamethrower is now being blocked by heavy armor and other objects. The flamethrower aside for a second, at least with the Breaker Incendiary, it was stated to be nerfed because it had a 30% pick rate on terminate missions. Again, this is very clearly balancing by spreadsheet. Railgun was nerfed because it had a high pick rate. Flamethrower was buffed because it had a low pick rate. Slugger was nerfed because it outperformed the marksman rifles, i.e. had a higher pick rate. The Breaker Incendiary was nerfed. This one was even stated because it had a high pick rate. The flamethrower was nerfed. I don't even know why. I'm guessing a high pick rate because it wasn't an overly powerful weapon to begin with. Well, it was, but for a reason. Again, this is very clearly balancing by spreadsheet, which is a bad idea because it doesn't look at why these issues are the way they are. I agree, if a weapon such as the railgun has a 90% pick rate, or even just the majority pick rate, and is far above every other support weapon, it should be nerfed. But just looking at the sheet saying this weapon is this weapon is this weapon is this, is a bad idea because it doesn't look at what's actually causing those pick rates. The railgun, I'll go through every example again. The railgun had an obscenely high pick rate of all of the support weapons because on launch, rocket and explosion-based weapons were bugged and would not do consistent damage. So the railgun was the only way to consistently handle chargers and bile titans because the recoilless rifle, the E8, the expandable anti-tank, and the spear just were not reliably dealing damage because rockets were bugged. Also, there was a bug with the PlayStation players where for some reason PlayStation players would deal more damage with the railgun than PC players. So the railgun was the obvious choice. And then they nerfed the railgun because it had a high pick rate, but everything else was just bad to use until they fixed the rocket explosion bug. And then the spear, the EAT, and the recoilless skyrocketed in pick rates. The flamethrower had the lowest pick rate on launch because of the damage over time bug. And buffing fire damage, shocker, did not fix it because damage over time was bugged. The Slugger was the best marksman rifle because all of the marksman rifles in the game at the time were bad. They had too low a fire rate, not enough damage, and not enough armor pen to be worth it. And in a game like Helldivers, that is a horde shooter at short to mid ranges, the type of niche a marksman rifle is supposed to fix is a bad fit for Helldivers. Marksman rifles are meant for for picking off individual targets at a distance. That is not the type of gameplay Helldivers lends itself to. So because the Slugger was able to do that, but also perform in close ranges because it is still a shotgun, it was better than all of the marksman rifles. And they nerfed the Slugger by reducing its damage, which was fair, but also they took away its stagger, which made it feel less like a shotgun. And now it performed worse as a shotgun and more like a marksman rifle. The Breaker Incendiary and the Flamethrower had such high pick rates on Terminid missions because of the slew of damage over time effects, damage over time buffs that Arrowhead released when damage over time was bugged. So when damage over time was eventually fixed, these weapons were way overtuned because of the incredibly high damage over time they had. And yes, they deserved a nerf, but not the way they got nerfed. The Breaker Incendiary did not need to have its total ammunition nerfed, it needed to have its damage over time, fire damage reduced. Same with the Flamethrower. It didn't need to be blocked by armor and objects. It needed to have its damage over time damage reduced. Making the Flamethrower, and this is the part that pisses me off. Okay, this is the part that pisses me off. The Flamethrower, all right, it was lauded. It was praised as being the most realistic depiction of a flamethrower in video games in all of gaming, because it shot out a stream of burning liquid, very visibly shot out a stream of burning liquid. But when they got rid of the armor, they got rid of the ability for the flamethrower to go through armor, they got rid of that visual effect for some reason. And their excuse for making it so armor can block flamethrower was realism. In the same update where they made the visual effect of the flamethrower less realistic. Are you kidding me, Arrowhead? They're also balancing a game like it's a competitive PvP game, and not what it is as a casual PvE horde shooter. You have a PvE game. There is no PvP in this game. It is not competitive. It is fundamentally entirely casual. They are chasing a meta and nerfing meta weapons. Why do you care if there's a meta in a PvE casual horde shooter? There will always be a meta. These are gamers we're talking about. There will always be a primary weapon that is the best. There will always be the best grenade. There will always be the best support weapon. There will always be the best stratagems. There will always be some kind of a meta. And these are gamers. They will suss out the meta within days. Why are you trying to chase meta to nerf them? You are wasting resources and dev time doing this. It's a PvE game. Who cares if some weapons are overperforming? You should focus on bringing underperforming weapons up to being on par, not bringing overperforming weapons, in your eyes, down. You're so clearly obsessed with pick rates because you nerfed the railgun because it had a high pick rate. You buffed the flamethrower because it had a low pick rate. You nerfed the incendiary and the flamethrower because they had high pick rates. You're so obsessed with pick rates. If you brought the underperforming weapons up so that they were viable on all difficulties, not even incredible, just viable, the pick rates will naturally balance out as players pick the weapons that they enjoy using the most. Some players will pick the objectively best weapon. There will always be those types of players. But I guarantee you most players want to pick the weapon that they like the design of and like how it feels. It's just baffling that they do this. And like, for some reason, Arrowhead, I don't know if they're changing things recently, but for whatever reason, at least in the past, they've had this obsession with players relying on stratagems and support weapons, and in order to do this, making the primary weapons bad. The way the game is structured is you're supposed to use support weapons and stratagems in like, oh shit moments. It's like, oh shit, there's a charger. Pull out the expendable anti-tank or the recoilless or the orbital rail cannon or the orbital precision strike. You have so many tools to deal with these things. But the problem is there's so many oh shit moments that quite often you don't have the amount of ammo in your support weapons, or your stratagems are on cooldown, that you can't rely on them every single time. And so Arrowhead they might still, but had this idea that primary weapons should be bad because you need to use your stratagems and support weapons. Well, when I got 5 chargers hounding my ass, all of my stratagems on cooldown, and my recoilless rifle is out of ammunition, I kind of want to be able to use my primary weapon to deal with the chargers. Because that is a situation, and yes, people will say that's a situation you shouldn't have gotten yourself into. But so, have you seen the spawn rates on the highest difficulties? 8, 9, and 10? Have you seen the spawn rates of Chargers and Bile Titans? It is very easy to get into that situation. It's Deep Rock Galactic is a fantastic example of this. It is the same type of game, a 4-player co-op horde shooter with a pseudo time limit instead of a hard time limit, and you also fight bugs. Every single weapon in Deep Rock Galactic is viable, and it makes the game more fun. I've got a Praetorian what is it? It was Praetorian is the big guy, but it was what's the one other than bigger than Praetorian? Hang on, give me a second. Oppressor. It's oppressors. Oppressors are some of the biggest bugs that are not boss enemies in the game. Every single weapon, given enough time, can kill an oppressor. So that's how it should be in Helldivers. Give Bile Titans, give Chargers a weak spot where any weapon could kill them to that spot with enough ammunition. Because there's so many of them on higher difficulties. I get that you want Bile Titans, Chargers, tanks, Hulks to be support weapon targets, to be stratagem targets. But our stratagems have such long cooldowns, and some of our support weapons do not have the ammo or have restrictions on them that make it not fun. That's the whole thing. That's the whole part of it, is it's just not fun to deal with this stuff. The game is so reliant on heavy enemy spam in the higher difficulties that you need a recoilless rifle. You need the spear. You need the orbital rail cannon. You need the orbital precision strike. You need the Eagle airstrike. You need the Eagle 110mm pods. And you can't take the machine gun. You can't take the arc rifle. You can't take, and for primaries, you can't take the laser gun. You can't take the defender. You can't take the liberator penetrator because they're just not good enough. And when you need all of your stratagem slots and your support weapon to fill anti-heavy, you need to bring a horde clearing primary. So that eliminates the majority of primaries. So if you increase the capability of primaries so that they are all able to perform on difficulty 10 or at minimum difficulty 8, then player pick rates will widen up as, again, players pick the weapons they like because they can use them. Obviously, none of this matters on like difficulty 3 where you can take any weapon and still complete the mission. Obviously, none of that matters. But once you get above difficulty 6 and up, your loadout choice matters a lot. And so making some of these weapons less viable because they were viable before is terrible when over half of your weapon roster is not viable to begin with. At the end of the day, Helldivers 2 is still a very fun game. I was playing it earlier, I've gotten back into it now that I'm done with the Shadow of the Erdtree DLC. I've gotten back into Helldivers 2 and it's still fun. But I'm not playing the difficulties I used to play because they're less fun now. And the fact of the matter is the game is less fun than when a month after the game came out. A month after the game came out was when the game was the most fun. It was around the time when we were liberating Tien Quan to get our first mech suit. It was the most fun around that time. The community was the most fun to be around. The memes were great. The community was welcoming. The game was incredible. But Arrowhead's terrible game design decisions have just brought it down and down and has brought my hope for the game down with it. I don't want all my whinging and complaining in this video to make it seem like I don't like Arrowhead or Helldivers 2. I love Helldivers 2 and I appreciate Arrowhead for the game they delivered. But it is undeniable that Arrowhead's practices are killing Helldivers 2. The player base is under 10% of what it was at launch, which, to be fair, it's currently at what they expected the game to launch to. It's, I think it's like hopping between 10 and 25,000 concurrent players or something like that. And, but what they're doing is everything they do, every time they release a patch with a weapon that was clearly balanced by spreadsheet, they release new content that wasn't QA tested, they just release crappy updates that increase performance issues and game crashes. And it takes time off of the lifespan of the game. It is the natural state of all live service games to eventually die. I know for a fact, I understand that one day Arrowhead's servers for Helldivers 2 will shut down and the game will die. But it has barely been 6 months since the game came out. It should not already be dying this quickly. And Helldivers 2 was my pick for Game of the Year. If you asked me back in like February, March, and April what my pick for Game of the Year is, offbeat, 100% I would have said Helldivers 2. Just easy. But I don't know anymore. I don't think it is anymore. and like I'm not super aware of most other games that have come out this year, so it might still be my game of the year by default. I mean, if like DLCs count, then Shadow of the Erd Tree, because that feels like an entirely its own entire game on its own, even though it's a tacked on expansion to a pre-existing game. So if we're counting DLCs that are the size of their own standalone games, then Shadow of the Erd Tree is my game of the year. But like, it's single individual games, full games that released this year, I guess it would still be Helldivers 2. But Space Marine 2 comes out in less than a month. So, and it's like the same style of game, but is a co-op horde shooter, but it also has a single player mode. I guess it's kind of the other way around. It's a single player story with an additional co-op horde shooter on it. But it's like, it has a part of the game that's the same style as Helldivers 2. So we'll see how well Helldivers survives after that, because the community has given Arrowhead a lot of goodwill, and they have fully squandered it with their actions. Yeah, I loved Helldivers 2, but it is getting worse, and that makes me sad. But thank you for watching. If you liked it, hit the like button. If you hated it, hit the dislike button. If you want to add something to the conversation, leave a comment down below. If you want to tell me that my face is stupid, then I'm an idiot, also leave a comment down below. What else is the YouTube pleasantries? Oh yeah, if you want to see me live, I live stream occasionally whenever I feel like it on Caustic Live. If you want to watch scientific content, like I used to do on this channel, check out Hello, I'm Chance. Thank you for watching, and have a good day.